Well, thank you. And isn't it funny to think that this time last year, we had Theresa May as Prime Minister. Brexit looked like it was never going to happen. The Brexit Party hadn't even been launched.
That's right.
Unbelievable. And I launched it on the 12th of April. 6 weeks later, we won the election, getting 50% more votes than the next party. It led to May going, Boris coming in. And, you know, when I saw him starting to say the right things, Rowan, I thought, you know what? There comes a time you've got to put country before party, and that's why I pulled out across most of the country. So he is the Prime Minister. We did leave on the 31st of January, a big historic moment, and there was such a wave of optimism. The property market was turning, things were happening, and now, of course, we've got this crisis to deal with. But all I can say is, thank goodness we're not in what is going to be after this an even more German-dominated European Union. We may have our problems, all of us, but at least we're free.
Well, I was going to say, Nigel, that a crisis like this, it takes one nanoparticle. You've spent much of your life, probably you wish you hadn't had to, but much of your life with the mandarins of Brussels, the bureaucrats, the fat cats. It's taken one nanoparticle, one virus, to really expose how hopelessly useless the EU is. You've got Italy and Spain in absolute dire circumstances, Germany sitting back seeming to be looking after themselves, the French lecturing everybody else. The EU surely has to realise it's over now.
Oh yes, I mean, look, you know, when it comes to death, to put it frankly, that is a national thing, not some vague concept of a supranational state, and that's why you've seen borders being reimposed and all the rest of it. I always thought the European Union would come crashing down. I always thought this sort of move towards global governance was baloney. I never imagined it would take a serious global illness to finally finish it off. But there is a danger here, a real danger, and it's this. You know, when Germany refused to export medical masks to Italy, despite the desperate state they were in, guess who stepped into the breach? The people who caused it, the Chinese. And what we're seeing over much of the world is China now acting as the charitable godfather, you know, dishing out money, dishing out medical equipment, and trying to use this crisis to gain global power. And I wouldn't want to see, you know, the idiots in Brussels replaced by Chinese communism dominating the world even more than it does today.
Absolutely. Now, Britain's kind of two weeks ahead of us here in Australia. Italy's probably 2 weeks. You were warning a couple of weeks ago that Britain was catching up with Italy. You have friends and contacts in Italy. How bad is it in Italy, Nigel, and how bad is it in the UK as we speak?
Oh, Italy is just horrible. I mean, Lombardy particularly, it's awful. We've got now over 10,000 deaths directly as a result of this coronavirus. A lot of young people, and this is worth bearing in mind, who are in intensive care or have been through intensive care, you know, many of whom will actually be quite scarred physically, if not mentally, by this for the rest of their lives. You know, it is bloody, it is horrible, and there's no end in sight. We thought earlier on this week it looked like the death rate was slowing. It's now pretty consistent at around about 1,000 a day that are dying in Italy. And if you look at the curve, the graph, we are on exactly the same trajectory. And Rowan, what has driven me mad is that, you know, we are still in this country, we are still allowing flights into London every day. They're coming in from Tehran, they're coming in from Italy, they're coming in from China, and people aren't even being checked, not even a basic temperature test being done at Heathrow Airport. And I sort of sometimes think the British response to this has not been very joined up. So look, you know, we've had a bit more warning than the Italians have had. We're turning big conference centres now all over the UK into emergency hospitals, into even morgues in some cases. We are desperately trying to get more ventilators because that's what people need, given the high incidence of pneumonia. But you know what? We're not in a good place.
Isn't it ironic, Nigel, that we all assumed that the great test of Boris Johnson would be Brexit and delivering Brexit? It appears this ain't the case any longer. The great test will be how he handles coronavirus. Now, only a week or two ago, he was prancing around like some Princess Diana shaking hands with coronavirus victims, and now he's got the disease himself. I hope he recovers quickly, but do you get the sense that the British government, and to a lesser extent the Australian government, were caught very flat-footed and hit the wrong notes to begin with?
Look, there have been lots of, scare stories over the years, haven't there? Various, issues that have come along, like SARS, that in the end did not spread across the world. And, governments can't respond to every single scare story that faces them, and I get that. However, what really angers me is, it was obvious 3 weeks ago what was going on in Italy. A country comparable to ours in so many ways, a country, in fact, with a very good health system as well. And we did not act quickly enough. Now, at the moment, the public are giving Boris Johnson the benefit of the doubt, and that's because in a crisis, you want to believe in your government. But you know something? The Germans are doing 500,000 tests every single week. We've so far managed 120,000 tests in 6 weeks. So Germany, way out ahead of the rest of us. South Korea pursued a very aggressive policy of testing, of isolation, of tracing those who've been close. There are ways of stopping this. And the British government have kind of U-turned, because originally our policy was herd immunity. The idea was we'd allow 60% of the country just to catch this, become immune to it, and then we could all get on with the rest of our lives. The problem is that would have meant 500,000 deaths. And people like myself and well-known television personality Piers Morgan were screaming about this. And thank goodness we've now changed policy. And I would say this to everybody. Being locked down is not a whole bunch of fun. It's boring. It leads to family tensions on a scale that make Christmas look pretty easy for most people. And of course, economically, it's hugely damaging. But we are facing an enemy that is very new, a virus that we don't yet fully understand. And to go into battle against that enemy ill-prepared would be madness. And I would say this to everybody. Locking down does make sense. It buys us time. Yeah, I know it could be a year until a vaccine's developed, but if we can find a drug that is a short-term antidote that deals with the symptoms of this problem, and if that of itself across the world saves millions of lives, then I think that's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Scott Morrison is pursuing, it's a neat political line, but his agenda now is I'm saving lives and livelihoods. So we're trying to have our cake and eat it in Australia by saying, well, we're not going to go into lockdown. We were going to have football and not have football, the usual U-turns you saw in Britain. Can you save lives and livelihoods at the same time, in your opinion, Nigel?
Well, look, what's going to happen, of course, is that governments will help businesses, support businesses. There are different ways of doing it. I mean, note, please, that Trump last night signed off on a $2.2 trillion injection into the American economy, including helicopter money, where everybody that earns less than $75,000 a year will have $1,200 put into their bank account so that they can pay their bills. So there are different responses all over the world. Government debt will go through the roof. But the truth of it is, and Scott Morrison, I think, will have to face this sooner rather than later, it's a very simple choice right now. Do you say economics is second, saving lives, finding vaccines, finding antidotes is first, or do you say we're going to carry on without too much economic harm, but accept the fact that vast numbers of people will die? And I mean vast numbers of people. The Australian population is about a third of the UK's. If you carry on the way you are, you might be looking at a couple of 100,000 people dying of this. I mean, morally, I don't think any modern Western democracy can just stand by and allow that number of people to die.
Now, we've seen, a couple of beaches closed and football stadiums closed and so on, but we haven't gone on into lockdown. The schools are still open. Should we be going into lockdown? Should we be shutting our schools and universities?
Yeah, I saw the Bondi Beach pictures. They went all over the world, and we saw the response from the government. It was very similar here. Last weekend was the first weekend of lockdown, and it was the first proper sunny day in England this year, and everyone treated it like a bank holiday. The seasides were full and everybody was out, and now we've got the police stopping us, asking us where we're going. Look, the experience of nearly all Western governments, Rowan, is that they say, we won't do this. We won't close the schools. We won't stop football matches. We won't lock down, only a few days later to do all of those things. And my guess is Australia is on exactly the same course. So I'm afraid, 10 days, 2 weeks' time, you will all be locked up in your houses and apartments and told you can leave once a week to go and get the groceries. So I think that's where we're all going.
Absolutely. Now, Nigel Farage, you're a great friend of Donald Trump's. How do you, I'm not asking you to divulge any personal phone calls, obviously, but you can if you want to. How do you think Donald Trump has handled it? And do you think the idea of setting a timeline, so, OK, we're going to go focus on the medical side of things, but Easter or June or whenever it might be, we're going to let the reins a bit looser. Do you think that's a wise strategy?
You can see the conflict there within Trump, can't you? The conflict between being president and not wanting huge numbers of Americans to die, and yet within him, here is this capitalist, free market entrepreneur, buccaneer, who wants Americans out there working. And you can see that conflict being fought out within Donald Trump every day. Look, he did put flight bans on China as long ago as January. He has corralled big business in America in the most remarkable way. That incredible press conference. There he was with Walmart. There he was with Roche. There he was with, with Facebook and Google and all these people. So the clever thing that Trump has done is to get the big private companies involved with the American effort. When it comes to him saying that Easter Sunday, which will be the 12th of April, wouldn't it be wonderful if the churches were full across America and everybody was back at work? Well, look, it'd be wonderful, but shall I say it's wishful thinking in the extreme.
So tell me, how would Margaret Thatcher have handled this, do you think, Nigel Farage?
Margaret Thatcher, of course, was a scientist. Everyone forgets that. She got her degree in chemistry. She was a keen scientist, and she took a great interest in all of these things. Thatcher's instincts, of course, she hated communism. She hated big government. She and Reagan, believed that basically when governments got involved with economics, they made an absolute blooming mess of it, and it's far better to let people get on and create their own wealth. But she also was a huge patriot. And of course, her formative years were during World War II. It was something that left an absolutely indelible impression upon who she was. My guess is that Thatcher would have acted more quickly. She would have seen Italy and said, hey, look, we can't pretend we're different to Italy. It is going to happen here. And my guess is if Margaret had been in charge, we wouldn't now be asking ourselves, why are there not enough ventilators? We wouldn't be asking ourselves, why don't we test anybody until they're seriously ill and in hospital? I think Thatcher, a scientist, would have gripped this quite early.
We will make America great again.